So don't tell me that demography is destiny. It is not, and we can do better, and we must do better. So what I want to do as governor is I want to help build a new California, return us to the Golden State. Did you know that the reason that we're called the Golden State is when the explorers came to California, there were California poppies, which is the state flower, all over the hills, and the hills looked golden, and that's why we're called the Golden State. And we need to return to that, and we can do it. This state can be turned around. We can be the place of the best prosperity, the best education system, the place we all want to live and raise our families, the highest environmental standards, and yet a very business-friendly place. So with that, what I thought maybe we should do is, where's Pat?
I'm here.
Oh, there you are. Maybe we should move to question and answer. So thank you for inviting me tonight.
Thank you very much. So they're going to bring Well, you've heard certainly an energized person talk about the good things that she sees not only in business, in her personal and professional life, but also what she sees for the state of California. And I have to say, Meg, it's very energizing, and we do appreciate your.
So you got a little thing to put your feet on. I didn't.
Oh, bummer. Hey,
okay.
You know what? You're the boss. You want us over here? I know with whom is the boss.
I'm good, thank you.
So, Meg, it was really interesting kind of hearing of your, not only just a touch of your family background, but also your business background, your education. But I'm wondering, what was your life like as a young child? What was your family like? What was it like growing up in your home?
Yeah. I grew up in a great family, a middle-class family on Long Island. And my parents stressed the value of education, education, education. And we were expected to do well academically. We were expected to take advantage of all the opportunities that we had. And as I said, I went to public school K through 12. And we lived in a little town called Cold Spring Harbor on the north shore of Long Island, which is the home of the Cold Spring Harbor Labs, where Watson and Crick did much of their initial DNA work. And as a result, the math and science in the public schools was fantastic because there were so many of the scientist kids in our classes. So premium on education. We were encouraged to play sports. And I will tell you, as a girl, that made all the difference. I learned team sports. I learned how to be out there, how to play your position. And that stood me in good stead later on. As I said, I was the youngest of 3 children. My brother's 8 years older than I am. My sister's 6 years older than I am. And so I sort of got dragged along a little bit with much older siblings to whatever they were doing. But it was a great upbringing. And I will tell you, those camping trips to throughout the Western United States that I described, that went so well. The next year, my mother and her friend and the 8 kids took off on the Alcan Highway, which was unpaved for 3,000 miles in the same Ford Escort-lined vans, and we spent the summer in Alaska. So.
Your mom sounds like a very spunky woman. And
she was. My mom is 88 years old and is pretty spunky.
Yeah, well, she must be very proud of you. That's great. So Meg, looking back at college, what did you study in college, and is there anything that you would change in what you studied?
So I was an economics major at Princeton, and I loved every moment of it. I must say I loved Princeton. It might have had something to do that I was in the 4th class of women. Out of 1,200 kids in the class, there was 100 women. It was great. So I don't think there is much I would change. I played sports at Princeton. I worked on a magazine called Business Today, which sort of furthered my interest in business. And no, I actually probably wouldn't change much. I loved every minute of it.
Well, that's great when you can look back at college and say that you wouldn't change anything. There are a few things I may have changed. It may have been to study a little bit more. And,
yes, well, there was a little bit of that. But
we have lots of questions that came in from a variety of people, and so I want to try to work some of those in. And one of them is, what's one business strategy that you used at eBay that you would use to run the state?
So first of all, when I was at eBay, particularly in the early days, there were a number of maxims that we followed. And this will sound incredibly simple, but it's incredibly relevant to the state. Do you remember in the early part of the decade that it was all about eyeballs? It was all about how many people that you had. And in fact, it was not important to show a profit. And what was completely lost sight of which was a maxim at eBay, which is revenues actually need to be higher than costs. This is not complicated, but it is a strategy I will take to Sacramento. So that's, I think, the first thing. The second thing is this notion of hiring the very best people. It turns out, as governor of California, you get thousands and thousands of appointments, people that you appoint to agencies and departments. In fact, it's about 4,000 appointments. The top 400 of which make an enormous difference, right? Because they're agency heads and your department heads. And if you haven't found the very best people to serve in the state government and make sure that you are all on the same agenda, I'm not sure you really have a chance. And so this notion of the right people in the right job, working on a very focused and systematic agenda is something that I learned at eBay that I would absolutely take to Sacramento.
Sounds like a good direction. So let's go back to your earlier life for a moment. And you mentioned your husband is a very successful neurosurgeon, but you didn't mention how you met him. How did you, when did he show up and how did you meet him?
So my husband went to Harvard undergraduate, and my sister was a PhD candidate in archaeology and anthropology at Harvard, and was what's called like a dorm master type person. And my husband was one of her dorm kids. And so I met him first when I was a sophomore in college, and he was a senior at Harvard. I was a sophomore at Princeton, he was a senior at Harvard. I went up to visit my sister, and my sister said, I want you to meet Griff. And, but then he went off to London for a couple of years. I went back to Princeton. But when I showed back up at Harvard Business School, he actually invited me to a number of things, and I invited him to my sister's wedding. He neglected to show up for my sister's wedding. In fact, he showed up as the band was leaving. And he called me the next day and he said, would you like to go to the Head of the Charles, dinner at the Hasty Pudding, dinner at the opera? He gave me like 9 different things. So we actually started dating when I was at Harvard Business School.
Well, so that's an example of how something could have gone very wrong, actually turned out to go very right.
Exactly, and very forgiving on my part, I might
Yeah,
add.
I started to say. And that's kind of where I was going. Have you reminded him of that a few times?
Every day.
Yeah, good for you. Good for you. We like that. You go. So here's another question from the audience. It's with California voters continuously voting to require the state to provide additional services, why do you think increasing revenue sources, i.e. taxes, or why do you think voters would think increasing taxes is inappropriate?
So let me tell you about where we are with the state of California. So as I said, we have a $150 billion budget. And what has happened, of course, is that revenues have come in below where the budget office thought they would because largely of the tough economic times in which we live. The California state tax system is very unique in that 50% of our revenue comes from personal income tax. And here's a little fact for you. 144,000 taxpayers in the entire state of California account for 25% of the revenue of the entire state. So when the IPO market is shut, when you can't sell your company to someone else, when residential and commercial real estate is not robust, you see this shortfall in revenue. And when your businesses see that kind of shortfall in revenue, what's the first thing you do? You actually reduce headcount because you have to until the company is healthy again. And what happened in this last budget negotiation is, in fact, no bureaucrats lost their job. There are 345,000 people who work for the state of California. They still work for the state of California. In fact, 2% more work for the state of California today than a year ago. And so instead, in this budget negotiation, we cut services and raise taxes as opposed to go after the size of the bureaucracy. And what I will tell you is state spending in California is 80% higher than it was 10 years ago. Does anyone think the state is 80% better? Are the schools 80% better? Is the infrastructure 80% better? So we have got to attack the size of state spending.